Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we're going to discuss our 2023 plan for growing garden herbs here on the homestead. Let's get going. I love to cook with fresh herbs. I love it even more when those herbs come right from our garden. Now, for years when I did my garden planning, I never thought anything about herbs. And whenever I did think about them, it was usually like when I was at the store buying plants, so they were more of an afterthought. I didn't really put them in the garden in their own space, that sort of thing. Over the last few years, I've kind of started to deviate from that. So today I thought what we could do is just kind of go through and chat a little bit about all the different herbs that we grow here on the homestead. When I designed this garden for Leslie, we knew that we wanted to have permanent residence of herbs in this garden. So the first thing that we had to do when we were planning it out was make sure that it was large enough for the plants that we wanted to grow. The reason I say that is perennial plants and your self-seeding plants, they're going to expand rapidly if you let them. So as you can see over here, we have the oregano that started as I believe it started as like one or two small plants, and we can get over here and look at it now. You can see even here in February, after all the freezing temperatures and everything, the oregano at the bottom still has green leaves on them. You'll have to excuse the garden here. We let the chickens in here once or twice a year so they can come through and scratch it up before we start adding amendments. You can also tell over here the same thing with the sage. It still has some green on it through the course of the year, but we started this one from seed, and we put in 2 individual plants, and that was 3 years ago whenever we planted this garden. So you can see over time it went from 3 little sprigs to taking up quite a bit of room. And in the summertime, it'll come, all the way out here. In the fall, Leslie goes through, and they do require some maintenance. You have to go through, trim them up and trim them back. It's a really good time also to kind of take clippings from them. If you take the roots out, they're really easy to start. You can even take, especially from the oregano over here, you can just take a clipping of it and put it in water and it'll just sprout roots, and you can give it away and somebody else can have a nice oregano patch as well. So really all I had to do here to prepare a permanent garden bed for these herbs is I went through and I just removed about 6 inches of dirt and then I filled it with about 3 inches of wood chips, and then I put a well-aged compost on top of it. And now yearly, all we have to do is we'll go around the base of the plants through here, all of the perennial or areas that self-seed, and we'll just put in about 2 or 3 inches of well-aged compost. Usually this time of year, hence the reason you see it all dug up from the chickens. It's almost that time. But we'll go through and we'll just put in like 1 inch or 2 of compost around everything. Make sure it's well-aged so you don't burn up your plants. And that's really all it takes. And each year, you end up getting an abundance. So in this bed, we grow several self-seeding and perennial herbs. We grow sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, and lavender. Now, just in this bed alone, the variety of herbs that we grow, it gives us access to make a huge amount and variations of different dishes from the garden. So in addition to the self-seeding and the perennial herbs, we also grow 2 herbs from seed each year. We grow basil and dill. Now both of these herbs we'll just put in containers from seed in the greenhouse in early April, and when we go to plant our summer garden, probably into April, early May, we'll go ahead and put them in their permanent homes. Now there's a reason for this, because dill and basil both make great companion plants. So what we do is we plant our basil with all of our tomatoes, and we plant our dill alongside of our cucumbers. Now, when it comes to what we use them for, basil I use with anything with tomatoes, so that kind of makes it my favorite by default since, I love tomatoes. And the dill, of course, we use for all of Leslie's pickling whenever she pickles okra or cucumber. So far, we haven't successfully grown enough deal for all of our own canning. Last year, we got really dadgum close though. So we're hoping that we just kind of expanded a little bit. We'll be able to make all of our own pickled everything with our own deal. So that'll be nice. So whenever it comes down to the companion planting part of it, what we've discovered is if we plant our basil with our tomatoes, it cuts back quite a bit on the pests, and it works the same way for the cucumbers and the dill. Last year specifically, we grew like huge rows of cucumbers, and one row was infested all year long with the squash bugs. The row that had the dill grown in front of it, it did have some squash bugs, but it wasn't near the issue that it was on the one without it. But for this video, I tried to find some sort of peer-reviewed information about if the companion plants actually work that way. But it seems like at this point it's just anecdotal. I still recommend doing it. You know, the tomatoes and basil worked really well the last 2 years. The cucumbers and dill have worked really well. So again, it's anecdotal, but I would give it a shot. The final group of herbs I'd like to discuss today are the bulbing herbs. Those would be onions and garlic. Both of these are substantially easier to grow than I originally thought they would, although they do take a bit of pre-planting if you're wanting to get large bulbs out of them. Whenever you go to plan your beds for garlic and onions, you'll need to consider that they'll need a bit more potassium and phosphorus than the other herbs we've discussed. So the way we do that is the larger ones that we want to plant, the ones we plant in the late fall for harvest in June of the next year, we'll put the blood and bone meal in the ground before we put the bulbs in. That way it has all winter long to sort of absorb them, and then if the winter kills them off, then it can soak into your soil. And then again in the springtime, whenever you first see the greens coming up, it's a good time to go ahead and put a little bit of the blood and bone meal on there. Now the way we like to do this is our spring onions will go in the ground in early to mid-February, and we'll plant more every 2 to 3 weeks, all the way up until we'll probably add the last ones in there late April, and we'll plant in abundance at that point. You can pull them all the way up until probably mid-June to early July, at least here in 7B. Once the temperatures start routinely getting above 90, they have a tendency to go to flower, and at that point you want to go ahead and pull them and use them at that time. As always, I appreciate all you folks that have made it here till the end. Until next time, I hope everyone takes care of themselves. Peace.